Title: Thomas gets left home alone. Introduction. Hello and welcome to another Tom and Jerry story. This is all about Thomas being left home alone when Grandma goes on vacation with Killer for a night away from Thomas's antics. Characters. Grandma is the owner of Thomas and Spike. Thomas is the misbehaving cat. Spike is Grandma's bulldog. Butch is Thomas's best friend. Warning: this is only for people over 16 years of age. This is very violent with tons of fighting and weapons references. This is very violent. Viewer discretion is advised. This is made for enjoyment and entertainment purposes only. That is all I have to say. Enjoy the destructive story. Plot. It is a peaceful spring evening in Utica, New York. In the Anderson household, Grandma and Killer are racing around the house. They are getting ready for a one-night stay in a hotel 20 miles away from the house. A few minutes later, Grandma and Killer enter Thomas's bedroom. A few seconds later, Grandma reads out a list of 702 rules that Thomas has to follow. 1 hour later, Grandma tells Thomas she will be periodically checking her security cameras. Thomas screams in anger as he pushes Grandma and Killer out of his bedroom. A few seconds later, Grandma, Killer and Thomas walk downstairs. 2 minutes later, Grandma and Killer get into Grandma's Tesla. 1 minute later, Grandma and Killer speed off. 2 seconds later, Thomas flips off Grandma and Killer. Half a second later, Grandma gets out of her Tesla. 10 seconds later, Grandma slaps Thomas. A few seconds later, Grandma gets back into her Tesla. 10 seconds later, Grandma speeds off to a Hampton Inn. A few seconds later, Thomas walks to his bedroom. A few minutes later, Thomas calls over Butch. A few minutes later, Butch walks into the house. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch hug. 10 seconds later, Thomas and Butch create a plan on how to get revenge on Grandma and Killer. 10 minutes later, Thomas and Butch walk downstairs to the basement with a wheelbarrow full of bricks. 20 seconds later, Thomas and Butch finish putting bricks into the washer and dryer. 10 seconds later, Thomas and Butch start a cycle on the washer and dryer. Then they run to find cover. 20 seconds later, the machines explode and shake the entire house. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch walk upstairs. 2 minutes later, Thomas and Butch walk into the bathroom with several cherry bombs. 1 minute later, Thomas and Butch walk out of the bathroom with a fuse box. 10 seconds later, the bathroom blows up, which shakes the house again. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch walk outside to Butch's stolen car. A minute later, Thomas and Butch walk into the kitchen. 5 minutes later, Thomas and Butch finish laying out every dish in the house onto the kitchen counter. 10 seconds later, Thomas and Butch begin destroying the dishes with 10-pound metal sledgehammers. 3 minutes later, Thomas and Butch begin destroying the utensils. A few minutes later, Thomas and Butch begin destroying the kitchen cupboards, microwave, oven, fridge, kitchen closet and kitchen table. 2 minutes later, Thomas and Butch rip holes on the liner of Grandma's pool. 10 seconds later, Thomas starts to destroy the pool pump, heater and filter to make the pool unusable. 10 minutes later, Thomas and Butch finish destroying Grandma's shed and hot tub. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch destroy Killer's dog house. 2 minutes later, Thomas pushes Grandma's $350 grill off the deck. A few minutes later, Thomas and Butch walk into the house with steel axes. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch destroy Grandma's $40,000 glass figurine case. A minute later, Thomas and Butch destroy the living room TV. 10 seconds later, they claw up the couch. A few minutes later, Thomas and Butch destroy every window on the first floor. A few minutes later, Thomas and Butch destroy the front door. A minute later, they destroy the kitchen and basement door. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch run around destroying every surveillance camera Grandma installed. 5 minutes later, Thomas and Butch walk outside. Meanwhile, at the Hampton Inn, Grandma and Killer are getting ready to sleep for the night. A few seconds later, Grandma opens her camera app. A few seconds later, Grandma snaps her toothbrush in half when she sees every camera is offline. A minute later, Grandma and Killer head to bed. Back at the Anderson household, Thomas and Butch walk into Grandma's bedroom with dynamite, hammers and tons of construction tools. A few minutes later, Thomas and Butch finish destroying Grandma's bedroom. 10 minutes later, Thomas and Butch finish packing up everything Thomas owns into a moving van. 1 minute later, Thomas and Butch blow up Grandma's bedroom. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch head to sleep. 8 hours later, Thomas wakes up. 10 seconds later, Thomas and Butch walk into the kitchen. 30 minutes later, Thomas and Butch finish eating everything in the kitchen, leaving the healthy stuff alone. 2 minutes later, Thomas blows up the kitchen with a stick of dynamite. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch start destroying the roof with steel pickaxes. 10 minutes later, Thomas and Butch start destroying Grandma's garden. 3 minutes later, Thomas drives a lawnmower over Grandma's garden. 3 minutes later, Thomas and Butch drive the stolen car into the house at 50 miles per hour. 10 seconds later, Thomas and Butch grab flamethrowers. A few seconds later, Thomas and Butch torch Grandma's destroyed house. 3 minutes later, Grandma's Tesla pulls up in front of Grandma's burning house. 10 seconds later, Grandma calls the fire department. 15 minutes later, Grandma walks through her house after the fire was doused. 10 minutes later, Grandma speeds off to her bunker. 10 minutes later, Grandma arrives at the house. A few seconds later, Grandma gets out of her Tesla with 2 duffel bags containing rusted up construction tools and weaponry. 3 seconds later, Grandma picks up Thomas and Butch. The next scene is so dreadful, horrendous, horrifying, frightful, grim, sickening, stomach-turning, nauseating and stomach-twistable that if you hear it you will have nightmares and PTSD for the rest of your life. In the end, Thomas and Butch's fates are unknown. Conclusion. Hello. I hope you enjoyed this destructive Tom and Jerry story. More stories to come. Bye for now.